if you go into a bank and you want to borrow money, they're going to require a business plan with you. So why in the world do we think that we can just fly by the seat of our pants when it comes to accomplishing big dreams and reaching our goal and destiny, whether it's a personal goal with family or marriage or kids or whatever, or whether it's a professional goal, related to storytelling, writing books, accomplishing big things, becoming a speaker, whatever it is you want to be. You've got to be able to work backwards and think it through and then begin to push forward and create time. That's one of the biggest tips I can offer is don't think that you can just fit any of this in.
From cave drawings to family histories to stories around the fire, humans crave order among chaos, connection amid isolation. So we tell stories. Our mission at the Storytellers Network is to bring the art of story to the masses. Whether you're in marketing, you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing your own personal brand, telling your story effectively can make the difference between celebrating milestones and collecting unemployment. The Storytellers Network strives to help storytellers tell their stories so you can learn from the best. Now, your host, Dan Moyle.
Welcome to the Storytellers Network podcast. I'm your host, Dan Moyle. And as you know, I believe in the power of story, whether it's personal connections or it's business or it's something with a nonprofit, whatever it is. I know that storytelling is what separates us from all other life on earth. And we're about to get into yet another great story with a fantastic storyteller. But real quick, a reminder that our website has great resources available. There's past episodes with terrific conversations and contact information for me. Visit thestorytellersnetwork.com for all of that. Now, in today's show, I wanted to bring on a special guest to explore something a little bit different. Today, we're talking about your journey to greatness. It's more a resource than an example of a storyteller. My guest today is the author of the book called Your Journey to Greatness Through Routine, and she's also the host of her daily podcast with that same name. And she's the CEO and founder of IPV Consulting, working with companies to address organizational dysfunction, getting to the root of human behavior using cognitive training methods. It's absolutely incredible. And Michelle Steffes is joining me today. So let's get to Michelle's stories. Michelle, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking time to talk to storytellers today. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's fun to connect with a fellow Michigander. You're in the middle of the state on the west side. I'm down in the southwest, so we're not too far away. You're in the Grand Rapids area. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I love it here. I can go in any direction and end up somewhere, right?
Right, exactly. You're not more than 2 feet away from water, it feels like in Michigan. So anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's good to connect, Michelle. I'm glad that we got connected through Kristen Hartnagel, one of my other guests from a former season. So thank you, Kristen, if you're listening, for connecting us. Michelle, I like to start here. Do you kind of consider yourself a storyteller in everything that you do?
Yeah, you could say that. I do a lot of speaking and training, and I typically involve a lot of stories because, people always connect with stories, and I have a lot of them to tell.
And why is it, do you think the story does connect us? Why are they so effective in what you do?
I really think there's a lot of different levels to it. I mean, first of all, people can identify with a story. The second thing is and I used to study the Hebrew language, and, we think in pictures. We just do. That's just how we were created. That's what we think like. So when you can involve a story, it's easier to kind of see the whole scene, but also picture what the whole picture, I guess the whole life-changing picture might be in the effects of what you're telling.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think in pictures and so what I've learned over all these different conversations is that kind of what you said, Michelle, story connects us. It's emotional. We think that way. There's a brain science behind it. So those of us who are telling stories are really doing some, not to like overshoot it, but doing some pretty amazing work out there in the world, connecting people through empathy and pictures and that kind of thing. So thank you for being a storyteller.
Absolutely.
So where does that begin for you, Michelle? Can you think back over the years to a time when you kind of just realized that you tell stories, or is that something that someone told you and you thought, okay, this is going to work for me? Where does that start for you?
Well, I learned long ago that, people are going to be won by not just the words you speak, but by the message you share. And when you can share a message, it comes from your heart. It's filled with passion and reality, and people can see you as someone who's authentic. So storytelling for me became incredibly important in not only what I do, but what I can offer to connect with others.
Okay, that makes sense. So in this Entertainment Storytellers season, as I said in my intro, I'm taking a little bit of a break here in this season to talk to you, Michelle, because looking at your background, everything you do, you explore such deep subjects in your writing and in your business, that kind of thing. And I think that those of us who are storytellers, we face a lot of challenges from, self-doubt to anxiety, all the way to depression. And I wanted to explore your world of greatness through routine. Do you see that as a way for storytellers to achieve some amount of success?
Oh, no question. No question.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to storytellers, and especially if, they are dealing with the gamut of emotions, and all of us are, in fact, an interesting statistic, about 85% of the population is kind of living reactively. So, an issue happens, or a concern, or a challenge, and the temptation is just to react to it rather than to pull back and reflect and decide how you want to react. And, that's just human nature for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But living a specific routine and looking towards living intentionality, in other words, from the moment you open your eyes to you close them at night, is what changes the game for everyone that I've ever worked with. Mm-hmm. And when you can live intentionally and you can think about the story before it happens rather than after it happens, mm-hmm. there's a power in that.
Mm-hmm. And so what I hear you say is that as much as we want to be creative and go with the wind, routine really sets us up with those. I almost picture we think in pictures, right? I think of like guardrails, that if I can have that routine, I can be more creative. Is that what you found with people in success?
Definitely. You expand your boundaries at many levels. For one thing, when you are living after the story, in other words, the story happens and then you react to it, you typically change the physiology of your body, which is something that I study often. You also change the heart energy. You affect your neural networks, which is the brain science behind everything, in ways that are counterproductive rather than productive. Flip it now, and if you are able to think about the story and create it in advance, in other words, you're thinking intentionally, you're responding intentionally, you're deciding ahead of time how you're creating your day, basically. And now you're in control. To the most part, things are going to happen you don't always expect, but you're in control, but you're also in control of your emotions and how you're going to respond. And that, in fact, opens your mind up to be more visual and more creative because you're reducing cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And that is something that causes paralyzation of the frontal cortex of the brain. And I could get into all that science if you'd like me to.
We may. It gets deep. I know that. And you talk about stress and burnout, that kind of stuff, and we'll get to that as well. So what does that look like maybe on a daily basis or whatever it is for storytellers to use routine to achieve that greatness? What does that really look like when you start talking to a client or you're giving a speech? Where do you start when it comes to that kind of routine?
Well, one of the first things I ask them is, what's your vision? Because if you don't really have a vision as to where you want to wind up as a storyteller or whomever you might be, whatever your goal in life might be, maybe your biggest aspiration, then you can't really hit a target that you can't see. Mm-hmm. So deciding what your biggest dream is, deciding what your vision is absolutely key. The second thing that I ask them is, what's your routine to get there? Because if you get up and you do the same thing at the same time every day with the same emotions, the same reactions, and the same kind of thinking, you'll never expect any different results. As the old saying goes from Henry Ford, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got, right?
Amen. So part of your work that is what I'm hearing is to focus people. You ask those questions rather than tell them. You get this out of them and then help them maybe kind of see it. Have you found that setting up that routine comes from them, or do you kind of have like a template that you begin with for beginners out there thinking about it?
That's an outstanding question, Dan. I'm really glad you asked that. It's kind of both.
Yeah.
What my job is to pull the best out of my clients. And in fact, if you go to the Better Business Bureau or to Google reviews, you'll see that oftentimes that's the compliment that I get. Michelle pulls the best out of me. And really that's what it is. That's what we need. All of us need that. We just need someone in our corner pulling it out of us, because we always have that greatness in us. We always have that creativity. We kind of know what we want to do, but we need someone to come alongside of us and pull that out of us. And sometimes that requires systems to do that. So yes, I do have some systems in place. I do have methods that I use that tend to work with all of my clients. And once they get past a certain point where they've learned now to design a new routine and live intentionally from a different trajectory, then it's like taking the training wheels off. Okay, we worked with you, now you know what you're doing, and now you're able to do this on your own. So it's really changing the whole perspective and flipping the physiology of the person and shifting their vision to things that are going to be more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And I mean, you have to have your systems in place in order to teach, right? And if I'm going to work with you, I want you to set me up, and then I'm going to be able to think a little more. So, I mean, it totally makes sense, Michelle. So you talked about the changing the physiology and how that, you can really, truly change. It sounds like I picture it like a genetic level almost, really. Is that what we're talking about? Is that deep?
Yes, it does go that deep. Actually,
Yeah.
when you say genetic, the first thing that pops into my mind is epigenetics, which is cutting edge science. And, rather than getting into that, let's stick with a little bit of a first step approach on this. And, when it comes to your neural pathways, you have 100 billion neurons in your brain. You have since you were born. And when you think a thought, you're firing off electrical energy in your brain at 400 billion actions per second. And it's like a little lightning storm going off in your brain. And as you think thoughts, whether you're telling stories or, working on your systems for the day, as you think those new thoughts, you're growing what's called a dendrite. That's a pinkish brown in color. It's made of protein, and it looks like a little tree growing out from your neuron. And as you keep thinking that thought again and again and again, it continues to grow until it wires to another neuron. Now, you're wiring all these 100 billion neurons, and by the age of 35, you have 1,000 trillion synaptic connections that you've created. Wow. But you're never just growing one neural pathway. You're growing multiple. So you're growing networks of these. So, Dan, you have a network for driving that you don't even think anymore. It's in your subconscious. You may not even remembered stopping at a stop sign on the way to work. You have a network for your family. You have a network for how you create the Storytellers Network and what you do and how you interview clients. You have networks for, all sorts of things in your lives. And, oftentimes when we feel awkward or uncomfortable about doing something we've never done before, it's simply because we haven't built that network yet. For example, when you learned how to drive, at first it's very awkward, but now you can just do it, just subconsciously. So all of us are growing those networks, and we're also unwiring networks that we're not using. Hebb's law says that neurons that fire together wire together. Drew a blank for a second there. And so basically you're wiring or unwiring things constantly. And your choice to be, and what I call the self-directed neuroplasticity, is to create a routine that is designed by you to push you forward into the destiny that you want by making the right choices from the moment you open your eyes till you close them at night.
Wow. Man, that's incredible, Michelle. I guess so, not lost, but so caught up in all of that. Like I am not a brain surgeon by any means or a scientist, but it gets so fascinating to know that we can continue to build those networks. And can we continue to do that up until, old age? Is that, like, I've heard in the past, we've talked about how the brain stops growing, but is that really true anymore? Do we think that still?
No. Actually, by the age of 35, you kind of plateau a little bit, but you're always going to be neuroplastic for the rest of your life. You're always able to rewire your brain. And I could give you some stories, if you'd like, on examples of that.
Sure.
The first one I'd like to tell is a 3-year-old little girl, and she was having these terrible seizures. In fact, it was destroying her quality of life because she couldn't go more than 5 or 10 minutes and have another seizure, falling on the floor constantly. There was no normalcy to her life at all. Well, after many tests and medications and things that they did, they found out there was really not going to be a cure because it was all in one hemisphere of her brain. So what they did was they actually removed an entire hemisphere of her brain. So she only had half of a brain, okay? But within, and this is a true story, you can look it up, actually look it up online, but within about 6 weeks, she walked out of the hospital and she was talking. Now, she did require therapy after that, but if you met her today, Dan, you wouldn't know the difference between her and I. She's actually in a profession that requires a lot of intelligence, and she's functioning out of one side because her young age allowed her to rewire her brain entirely into one hemisphere. Now, that's one remarkable story.
Jeez, that's incredible.
It is incredible.
So do you have an example of being able to kind of rewire at an older age? I picture, so I'm in my 40s. I picture, okay, I'm kind of set in my ways now. I'm kind of done growing, but in reality, I'm not. I could start a second career. I mean, I have a friend who at 40 is becoming a doctor. He's a nurse right now.
Yes.
And so, have you seen that happen then with people too?
Definitely. I mean, I could name personal examples with clients of mine, but one really fascinating study that they did recently was they sent several men in their 70s to a resort, and in this resort they had them there for about 8 weeks, and everything in the resort was set up like it was in the 60s. Okay. So they basically had all the magazines, books, decor. The TV was an old TV with old TV shows, newspaper, everything. Everything in there was the 60s, and all they were told to do was just to come in and enjoy yourself as if you're in that year. That's it, that decade. And so they came in and they did that. Now, before they put them through this, they took all their vital signs. They measured their muscle movements. If they had any ailments of any kind, some of them had canes, some had walkers. They tested them on all these levels and wrote down the statistics. Well, when they came out, some of them didn't need their canes anymore. They didn't need their walkers. They were really transformed in a lot of ways because their brain allowed them to rewire in some way. Now, that is a form of epigenetics. And that study is a pretty incredible study. It's like the placebo. I'm sure you've heard a lot about placebo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's one example.
Wow. So there really is hope to teach old dogs new tricks, I guess.
Absolutely. In fact, one other study real similar to this is they had people in every decade. So they had, those in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they tested them on all different levels of their ability to think and process. So everything from intellectual to, mathematic to reasoning. And then when they tested the 70-year-olds, they found there was a decline. But they put these 70-year-olds through brain training in many of the levels, okay? So not in all the levels, but in several of the levels, they actually scored higher than the 20-year-olds after the brain training. It's about 6 months of brain training. So my point to this is that, yes, we are very neuroplastic. We can wire and rewire our brains. We can transform how we think and process. And again, it goes back to the old phrase, use it or lose it.
Mm-hmm. That gives, it's funny because I often think of listeners of the Storytellers Network as, young in their career, maybe a little bit young in age as well, just like starting out kind of thing. But in reality, wherever you are as a storyteller, you can take a new step and train yourself in some new way. So that's gives a lot of hope. I like that. It's fun. What do you think? So I'm going to say this question the way I'm going to, because I looked at your blog and I loved this idea. What is the biggest killer of energy, passion, and dreams, Michelle?
The biggest killer of energy, passion, and dreams is fear. I mean, when we allow fear to take us over, again, we're getting into the physiological changes that we create within ourselves. It will drain us. I mean, those that I'll just give you a few symptoms of somebody that is under chronic stress, high stress, which is a form of fear because either you're afraid you can't pay a bill or you're afraid you can't measure up to your boss's expectations, or, you can't toe the line, or you can't save your marriage, or, whatever it might be. It's always fear. Okay. The bottom line is fear. But when that happens and you're in that stress mode for too long, the cortisol raises as well as the adrenaline. Okay. and the serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, all the happy drugs in your body, they go down. Okay, so just some of the symptoms that somebody might experience, maybe your audience might experience, if they're in this situation. There'd be things like loss of memory. So you're forgetting things you wouldn't normally forget. You have a low sense of perception and depth of perception. So you're having to read something 5 or 6 times. It's still kind of going right past you. You're not sleeping at night because in the survival mode of cortisol and adrenaline, you actually drop your melatonin levels. I mean, if you're out in the woods, for example, and there's a lion growling in the bushes, that's not the time to take a nap, right?
Right.
So by survival, your cortisol goes up, dropping your melatonin so you can stay wide awake for your own life safety. You also are going to have eating disorders, nutrition disorders. You're going to have the amygdala hijack, which is the emotional disorder. So you're up and down, you're all over the board. So these are all, and there's many, many more symptoms. These are all symptoms of somebody that is very high in cortisol, not controlling their emotions. Their stress is out of control. So fear is the very base of that. Because when we meditate on the problem day and night, when we gossip to people about it, we think about it, we're not only growing negative neural networks that are affecting our ability to succeed, but we're also altering our physiology. And therefore, we're stifling our energy because it's going to make us exhausted, fatigued, tired. We're also making it so we can't sleep, which is compounding the problem. And by the way, when you're sleeping, that's when you're repleting cells in your mind, as well as very important nutrients. And then you're also affecting your ability to live in your passion and dreams, because you're constantly entertaining in the past or the things that hurt you rather than entertaining what's possible. So that's really the bottom line, is fear is the number one culprit in stifling those areas.
And that fear, as you said, Michelle, leads to things like stress, obviously. And in fact, I know in your research, you share the fact that, I think you mentioned it earlier, even like 8 out of 10 of us are stressed, which leads to burnout so often. And you talk a little bit about the 12 stages to burnout, from like excessive ambition and neglecting ourselves all the way to mental or physical collapse, truly burned out. If storytellers are in that right now, because I mean, storytelling can be stressful, right? Whether you're waiting for a book deal or you're, like you said, Michelle, reporting to your boss, whatever, we can get stressed and begin to get burned out. If we see that we're in that spectrum somewhere, whether it's excessive ambition all the way to actual collapse, how do we begin to turn that around? I mean, it seems so scary. Like, how do we turn that burnout around?
It is. And, if you'd like, I can review those 12 stages very quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
And then we can talk about how to reverse those. So The 12 stages of burnout begin with excessive ambition. Can you identify?
Right.
So it begins, you get a task and you're ready to go and you're ready to do whatever it takes to make it happen. And a lot of times type A people fall prey to that, but it can happen to anybody. Stage 2, you push yourself to work even harder, ignoring personal care and needs, which is your stage 3. And then stage 4 is displacement of conflict. So now you're kind of a walking time bomb, ready to go off on the next person that steps in front of you. And I'm sure some people can identify with that feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you don't even know why you're angry or upset or inflamed, but you just are. Stage 5 is you begin to change your values to validate your self-worth. And so you're just making excuses and, trying to reason yourself into to believing that everything's okay. Stage 6 is the next step, and it's denial of problems and blame. And so you're just in complete denial that you have a problem. Anybody that mentions it, you pretty much go off on them, or you just let them know, hey, it's not my fault. It's this or that or whatever. Mm-hmm. Social withdrawal is the next one. So now you kind of pull back. You don't want anything to do with anyone. Stage 8, you start to have obvious behavioral changes. People start noticing there's something wrong with you. You don't yet, but they do. As stage 9 is a confusion of identity. Now you really don't even know who you are or where you're going or what you want to accomplish. Stage 10 is an inner emptiness. You just feel lost and alone. And then, unfortunately, now stage 11 steps in. That's depression. So now you've literally altered your physiology to the point that, the cortisol has taken over and it has created cellular changes in your brain structure. So it shrinks the hippocampus. It shrinks the amygdala, which is the emotional center. Hippocampus is a memory center. And then stage 12, hopefully no one's ever been that far, but mental or physical collapse. So how we can reverse that is what I started our conversation out with, is the importance of, having an intentional routine or mindset. So it begins with physical health. And I've actually worked with clients that have dealt with things like brain cancer and cancer. And, their physicians were telling them, make sure you get exercise, because exercise actually increases endorphins, which drop the cortisol, and they're a natural painkiller. So if you're in a lot of misery or pain, whether it is emotionally or physically, exercise is a huge proponent to reversing that, and I recommend 20 to 30 minutes a day, minimum of 3 to 5 days a week.
Okay.
Also, working on retraining your brain. Your subconscious is 30,000 times more powerful than your conscious mind. And if you remember, that's all those neural networks. So, what you're feeding into it is creating who you are. And then having written goals, and writing things down and what you want to accomplish, and start, weaving your way out of it. Taking responsibility for yourself, and then blocking out time to work on yourself. These are all things, and there's so much more I could give you, but this gives you kind of a foundation of what it takes to get out of burnout.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, I'd like to give a couple of tips, but if somebody's really kind of facing that, I truly want them to contact you. We'll have links in the show notes that if you're looking at on that spectrum and you need more help, check out Michelle's website and blog and contact her. I mean, this is incredible stuff. Something you said about writing goals, how powerful is actually writing down your goals?
Well, a lot of people hear the word goals and they kind of squirm and they go, I don't really need to write them down. I know what I need to do. That's silly. I mean, besides, if I write them down, then I might be disappointed in myself if I don't do them. But there's a lot of power in it. I worked with a client. Her name is Katie. She lives on the east side of Michigan. And she was struggling with clinical depression. She actually was clinically depressed. And she had been that way for years. Well, one of the things that we worked on with her was written goals, but we also we also taught her how to make a list. And what I tell clients often is, take a piece of paper, divide it down the middle, have personal on one side, professional on the other side, brain dump everything out that you want to or need to accomplish. So all your tasks, everything that you want to do. Once it's in writing, you'll get an instant release. You'll start to feel better already, okay? And because it's written down, you're not going to stress over it anymore, because all you got to do is go back to the paper and there it is. So you're not trying to contain it all in your mind, creating this black cloud over your head. So that in itself, and writing it down, makes a huge difference. But the other piece to this, and this is Brian Tracy, a quote by Brian Tracy, is that writing it down actually mirrors the neurons and increases your odds by accomplishing it by 1,000%.
Wow.
The unfortunate thing is that only about 3% of the population typically will take time to do this on a consistent basis. So one real quick example is, every year I do a spring list of all the tasks, remodels, fixes that we want to do around the house. And I lost it last year for about 3 months. But because we had taken the time to write it down, when I finally found it 3 months later, because we had company coming and I must have misplaced it, everything was done on it. All because I wrote it down. When you write it down, it mirrors the neurons. There is a huge difference in writing something down versus just thinking it.
Okay. That makes sense. And so, so any storytellers that have dreams, turn them into actual goals and write them down. And does it have to be lofty goals? I want to sell 1 million books, or I want to get, a TV deal, or is it more creating those goals that you can reach, or is it a mix of both?
Outstanding question again, Dan. You know what? Writing them down, the lofty goals as well as the smaller goals, is really the key. And oftentimes I'll tell clients, look, have a lofty goal, but then break it down, chunk it down into little bite-sized pieces, because we can't always eat the elephant whole, right?
Right.
But if we will have, say, a master list of what we want to accomplish in a year's time, and then break it down into months, weeks, or even small tasks, maybe connections we have to make, maybe money we need to raise, maybe education that we need to acquire, even if it's self-study online, writing all those little pieces down and then blocking them into your schedule, you're going to find yourself having a lot more success. So my answer to your question is both.
Mm-hmm. So I picture it almost like well, you know, whatever, whether it's professional or personal, whether it's storytelling or, you know, if you're in sales or whatever it is, you've got like a 5-year goal, but we really don't necessarily know what 5 years from now looks like. So, but you've got your 5-year goal that you want to shoot for, but then every year you have goals that help get you there. And then every quarter year, you know, things to get, and then every month. So you really can get down to a very granular level. And that's kind of where it sounds like, anyway, the magic happens, I guess, huh?
Yes. Yep. Working backwards to figure out, what has to be done first, second, third. And, if you go into a bank and you want to borrow money, they're going to require a business plan with you. So why in the world do we think that we can just fly by the seat of our pants when it comes to accomplishing big dreams and reaching our goal and destiny, whether it's a personal goal with family or marriage or kids or whatever, or whether it's a professional goal, related to storytelling, writing books, accomplishing big things, becoming a speaker, whatever it is you want to be. You've got to be able to work backwards and think it through and then begin to push forward and create time. That's one of the biggest tips I can offer is don't think that you can just fit any of this in. Okay. All the stuff I'm sharing with you, everything from retraining your brain to creating an exercise routine to breaking down your goals, you will never, ever just fit it in because life gets in the way. You have to create a space for it. And that's the big thing about my book, Your Journey to Greatness Through Routine, is it teaches you the importance of creating a space the same time every day, doing the same thing. And it's new, okay? It's new. But if you don't do that, you won't create those inner alarm clocks. See, you never become different intrinsically. So you'll always slip back into the same old extrinsic reactions to the intrinsic being that you are. So if you don't change and allocate time, say, for example, getting up maybe another 15 minutes earlier or 45 minutes earlier, or using, say, a trigger. So when you get home, when you see your dog, you're going to go for a walk. And while you're walking, you're going to listen to a podcast. Those kinds of things are what's really going to change the game.
And I can attest to, like, setting my alarm 30 minutes earlier, getting up and going for a walk and listening to a podcast. I listen to more podcasts now.
Absolutely.
Audiobooks, whatever. And then and like you said, Michelle, you learn. It's an incredibly powerful thing to do. I like that routine. And when I fall off of it, man, it's terrible. I hate it.
Oh yeah. You feel it immediately. Like if you just go one day without it, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't do that today, or I couldn't do that today. And that's what we want. We want to become addicted to a good routine. Too many of us are addicted to a very bad routine, like, waking up and checking your cell phone first thing in the morning, or,
Yes.
Staying up too late and watching television or playing video games, and we could be spending that time feeding our hearts and minds those things that will help us to grow in the areas that we need to and create those neural networks to accomplish those goals.
And it's not that entertainment or like unplugging or whatever you want to call it is terrible in and of itself, but it's that, moderation thing, right? I mean, it's okay. You went to a movie this weekend, but don't then sit around and binge Netflix for the next 4 days. So
exactly. See, now that's back to intentionality. I'm so glad that you brought that out, Dan. It isn't evil. It's not like you can't do it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to be intentional about it. So, okay, how much, like when you do a budget, for example, you know how much spending money you have, or at least I hope you do, And so once you're past that spending money, you don't spend it, right? Because it's going to screw up your bills. So it's the same thing with our times. If you have a half hour for social media every day and that's all that you have to give, because the rest is devoted to, doing the studies necessary to be a great storyteller, to write that book, to become that speaker, to speak to the right people, to, spend time with your family. If you don't allocate that time and not exceed that budget, then it is not intentional living, and it's going to make you feel worse about yourself. So, if you like a TV show and you got it on your calendar to watch it, fine, but then shut the dang thing off. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Right.
You got to be intentional about every moment you're spending so that when you get to the end of your days, you don't look back and regret. Because the pain of discipline is far less than the pain of regret.
Well, I like that. I'm gonna have to tweet that out. That's very good. It's so easy to get caught up in that Netflix or Amazon. People also watch this kind of loop that we have to be intentional. I love that.
Absolutely.
Michelle, one of the things that I really liked too, I saw on your website, was you talk about gratitude. Why is thinking about gratitude and being grateful so important to this journey to greatness?
Oh my goodness, I could never express how important it is. Gratitude can change your life. And I know of people that have changed their life just through gratitude. It is, of all the emotions that we have, gratitude and compassion are the most powerful magnetic emotions. Now I'm using that word magnetic, and we all know that we have a magnetism, or people wouldn't wear magnets, you know. And frankly, when you're around somebody that is totally like pissed off at you or hates you, you can feel that energy, right? You can feel that. But even when somebody is passionate to you or kind or compassionate, you feel that. In fact, compassion and gratitude are so powerful that when they are delivered to a specific person or a group of people, it creates what's called neural resonance, which, just like a release of cortisol when you're stressed, neural resonance releases serotonin and oxytocin, okay? And what that does is that creates a bond between you and that person, and it tears down their defensiveness. So in your own life, okay, being grateful as often as possible. And I always, every day wake up, that's the first thing I do, is I just start running through the list of thank yous, very grateful for everything that I have. It sets your physiology in a very, very good state. Also opens your mind up so you can think more clearly for the day, and just puts you off on the right foot. And so it's just a huge chemistry, uh, uh, deliberate chemistry choice that will change the game for you.
And I found too, through research and personal experience, ending the day with that as well. I did this thing for a whole year where every night I wrote in my phone notes 3 things that I was grateful for that day. And it was very powerful. But I've also heard, and somebody think of this, Michelle, that again, actually writing, not just typing, but actually the physical act of writing is even more powerful. Is that true?
Yes, you are absolutely right. That is so, so true. I have different tools. I have actually several tools that I use when I coach people, and I have a sheet called the Performance Transformation Tool, and I always tell them you have to handwrite on it. And I've had clients go, "Oh, well, can't you just send me a fillable PDF?" And I said, "No," because your handwriting, again, it mirrors the neurons. It changes the way that you process the information. So you are spot on with that.
Yeah.
And kudos to you for your gratitude list every day.
Yeah, it was an experimenter, or whatever you want to call it, for 2018. I didn't follow through for this year, but I keep thinking about it and thinking that maybe I should. So that's an encouragement. So thank you for that. Because it was great.
Absolutely.
And then to go back and read it, the days that I don't feel so grateful, I've had a stressful day, or I'm angry, or I've been hurt, right? Go back and read a day ago, 2 days ago, a week ago, and say, okay, you know what? I really am blessed. So
Definitely. Because we all have things to be thankful for.
Oh yeah.
All of us. I mean, even just breathing,
I was, yep. 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 I have a roof over my head and breath in my lungs. I only have 2 today, but I'm grateful for those 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I get to open my eyes today, and if you don't have eyes to open, fine. You get to take a few steps and make a difference in somebody else's life, no matter what condition you're in or what you're dealing with. And that in itself can actually take people out of depression if they get serious enough about it. Because again, this is about flipping the physiology. It's about altering the way you think. In fact, and I'm just saying this to kind of throw it in there. I realize that some people do need to get, professional help. But a lot of what those depressive medicines do is they actually help you create dopamine. Well, dopamine is the automatic reaction to somebody that is experiencing joy, contentment, and gratitude. The dopamine is released in the body, and we have that ability. So if we can learn how to produce more dopamine on our own, we're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who are, if you're suffering from depression of some kind, obviously professional help, great. But I like the idea of being able to begin that journey with what, our creator gave us, our nature gave us, our God gave us, and use that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Michelle,
yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, it is. So you said earlier you speak, you've written a book, you have a daily podcast. Where do you find your inspiration for telling these stories, for getting this stuff out there? How do you find your inspiration?
Well, I mean, most of my inspiration comes from what I've been through myself, but, learn from experience, and I've turned my life around at many levels. But I would say that my clients inspire me, but I do take time every day. I have a power hour every single day. I'm up at 4:30 every day, and I spend the first hour and a half of the day inspiring, empowering, motivating, and educating myself so that I can live at my highest. And it has paid off again and again and again and again.
Hmm. So it kind of comes again down to routine, intentionality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wonder sometimes, when I was younger and considered myself a creative writer, I would think, well, I have to have a muse. I have to, Hemingway had alcohol. Some people have their muse of a romantic yearning or whatever. And so this like idea of a muse was there for a short time anyway. But then I began to realize, and I wonder if it's the same for you. It is that routine. It is keeping the muse, as it were, always alive and with you by getting up early, educating yourself, being more aware, being intentional. I guess that's more of the muse rather than the romantic version of it, huh?
It is, because the thing with this kind of a muse, as you're calling it, is that it's very, very fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing creates more happiness than success. Not just success of like reaching a certain pinnacle, but just living a life feeling like you are succeeding every moment of the day. And that success comes from a feeling of progress. So I love what Tony Robbins says. He said progress equals happiness. So when you live intentionally, okay, rather than just reactively or flying by the seat of your pants, then you feel successful every minute of the day. You know that you're spending your time very usefully and constructively, even if you decide to just unplug. If you just decide to go for a walk, or sit in the bathtub with a glass of wine, or but you made that decision because you knew you needed it, you wanted it, you allocated time for it, and it was a decision that you made, and so you're going to feel great about it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, completely, absolutely. And when you talk about success, Michelle, it sounds like you've been intentional, to use your word, and created this successful life around you. And while it may not be perfect and you're not ready to just cash it all in and say, I'm done, have you been able to, over the years, look around and go, there's a moment where I realized I've kind of made it? Like, what does that look like for you? What are the moments that you've said, man, this is going well?
You know what? I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that question. That's a pretty awesome question. I really think, as I reflect, that it was the day that I realized I was 100% responsible for my own future. Too much of society today, and if you don't believe me, look at social media and the news, but too much of society today is relying on somebody else to let their ship come in, if you will. Okay. And when you're waiting for somebody else to create your success, when you're waiting for somebody else to help you feel better every day, when you're expecting some situation or circumstance to change your destiny and make life full of butterflies and rainbows, you're living a life of disappointment, frustration, anguish, and burnout. But when you live a life knowing that every moment it's up to you personally to create your happiness, to create your joy, to create your success, to design your own sense of peace and well-being, no matter what goes on around you, nobody can take that from you. Nobody. And no circumstances can stop you from moving forward in what you believe you can accomplish. And that was the turning point in my world.
That's a great turning point. I love that question, because I like to hear people's success stories or their advice or whatever, however that comes out. And that was really good, Michelle. Thank you for that. That was a good one.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah. And I love the idea too about, you strike me as a very entrepreneurial person. And so having that control, whether you are your own personal brand, or whether you are an entrepreneur or a solopreneur or whatever, or you work for a company, you can be entrepreneurial and still own your journey. And so that's what I take away from that too.
Yes, absolutely. You own the journey. And to the level that you feel in control of your journey, and in the level that you feel happy, because even if you do something silly as, making a list of the top 10 things you want to do and doing the top 3 in it, that's going to make you feel fabulous because it was intentional and you made progress. Okay. So, I've had clients before, start to work with them that first week and they call me and they're like, oh my gosh, there's just so much. I don't know if I can do this. And I'll say, hold it, stop, wait. I want you to take the next 30 minutes and just make success for yourself. Okay. I don't care if it's cleaning a corner of your room or a file drawer. Just do something that makes you feel great, like you accomplished something. Okay. And then we'll get back, together. And they would do that. And then they would feel great again. You see, the reason for so much disappointment, so much frustration is people are just, hanging out, waiting for something to happen to them rather than creating their success by their own intentions. And it goes back to what I just said, but I can't say it enough because the thing is, I'm sad for the way that the world is living. And, I have the opportunity to speak in front of hundreds, even thousands. And, I'm always going back to that with people from some trajectory because it really does count on us. And if you will get that in your heart and mind, what will happen is you will change so much internally that you will attract the things that you've been waiting for. Because I love what Jim Rohn says. He said, professional education will make you a living, but personal education will make you a fortune. It's who you become that'll determine what you attract.
I like that. Man, Michelle, we could go on for hours. This is really good. Thank you for sharing so much with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure.
I have one last question I want to get to in just a second, but I want to give you an opportunity first. I will put links in the show notes, but where's the best way to get in touch with you, Michelle?
Well, they can go to my website, michellesteffes.com. There's a lot of information on there about how to get my book. I also have a podcast myself that I do called Your Journey to Greatness Through Routine. We are actually in a series right now on critical steps to making lasting change. And I'm speaking, really big straight talk right now.
Nice.
But I also have information on my speaking, training, all those types of things. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Facebook. And I have a couple different pages there, business as well as personal.
Excellent. I'll link to all those in the show notes for sure. Thank you again. So Michelle, if somebody said to you tomorrow, Michelle, you can no longer be a storyteller, because you told me that you were one. So if I said you can't be a storyteller anymore, what would be your last story that you'd want to be your epic go out on moment?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So my last story that I would want to share is when I came to an end point in 7 years at a corporate job. And I had to make some decisions, and they offered me a lower position because they were just coming out of some serious debt themselves, and they couldn't really afford me anymore, which is really the bottom line. I had to make a decision at that point. And when I started having to sell things and lose things in my world, and it was rocking my world, and I felt like it was spinning out of control, it was at that point that I dug my heels in. I clenched my fists and I said, no more. I am not losing one more thing. And it was then that I created a success routine. And it was then that I started studying and learning how to live at a whole new level of life that evolved my entire career. It involved who I am as a person. It took me to a brand new place in life that will forever affect now lives that I'll continue to affect as I continue to tell this story and help people to have hope that they too can change their destiny. It's just a matter of making that decision.
Powerful story, advice and inspiration. I would expect nothing less after our conversation. So thank you for that, Michelle.
Absolutely.
Michelle, once again,
thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you very much for sharing. And for those listeners, you need to definitely go check out Michelle's website. So, Michelle, thanks again.
Thank you, Dan. You have an excellent day.
So there you have it, a conversation chock full of great information and inspiration and so much science. If your head is spinning, take a moment, go for a walk, or if you're already walking, maybe sit down and have a breather. But Michelle, thank you so much for joining me for the Storytellers Network and exploring our journeys to greatness. Just fantastic. And you can connect with Michelle at the links in the show notes, as I mentioned, michellesteffes.com, and also on all that social media, etc. It's all down in the show notes. If you enjoyed the episode and learned something, please consider sharing it with someone. Send it to your friends, send it to your enemies, send it to anyone you don't know. Post it in social media, text it to anybody you want. Just stop somebody on the street maybe and say, hey, you need to listen to this episode because your journey to greatness matters. So there you go. Sharing is caring, and I do appreciate it very much. If you want to share your story with me, go to thestorytellersnetwork.com and hit Contact Dan on the contact page. Send me an email. Let me know what you love or don't love about the show. Let's have a conversation ourselves. Until next time, thanks for listening, and here's to telling our stories and having those stories to tell. Cheers.